Welcome to a new episode of Spirit in Stone. Today we are diving deep into the rabbit hole and embark on a journey into one of the most mysterious subterranean structures in the world. This video is the first part about the underground cities of Turkey that we have visited here in Anatolia. And today we are heading to Derinkuyu. Derinkuyu is one of the largest known underground cities in the world and likely part of a larger regional or even global network. In this video, we will explore the underground city in detail and work our way all the way down to the lower levels where the air gets thinner and the questions get bigger. How old is Derinkuyu really? Who were its builders? And why does no one actually know how deep these underground cities really are? Also, I managed once again to enter a secret passage not intended for visitors. This tunnel led me into a massive hall larger than any other room we saw in Derinkuyu. This area was completely dark, not secured and definitely not meant for visitors. We also investigate the question of how it is possible that Derinkuyu was only officially rediscovered in 1963, even though the underground city it is said to have been used by Christians and other groups for a long time. Was Derinkuyu forgotten or perhaps even intentionally sealed? Or is this facility possibly much older than we're being told today? We will get to the bottom of all of these questions in today's video. So sit back, grab a drink and enjoy this journey through Derinkuyu underground city. So when you arrive to Derinkuyu, the first thing you notice are these ventilation shafts that look like chimneys. Unfortunately, they are covered with metal sheets, so it's not really possible to film what's down there. But I can tell you it's extremely deep. Officially, these ventilation shafts are up to 60 meters deep. Some of them, they hit groundwater at the bottom, and to my knowledge, there is no reliable information on how deep this whole thing really is. I think there are 52 ventilation shafts in total have been discovered here, but we will get back to that later. So now let's go down into the underground city. This time my wife and my son were with me. My son really enjoyed it. He slept almost the entire time. And many of the buildings that are standing in Derinkuyu today actually have their own access to the underground city, or they use part of it as their own basement. And the part that we are visiting today has been prepared for tourism, of course. And it is said that only about 15% of Derinkuyu underground city is accessible today. And you can see right away when you enter the first level that many tunnels and passages have been sealed off, and to me it looks like that many passages have been also closed long time ago. You can see that there are different methods that have been used to close these tunnels. And that's also a similar picture what I see in Egypt. Whenever we go down to these subterranean structures, you will find a lot of passages and tunnels that have been closed. Some of them a long time ago. And I also managed to get into a restricted area of this underground city that was really intense. We will look at that later. And you can see it's really like a termite mound, a real maze down there. Many tunnels go in many different directions. And back there you see again it was massively closed off and blocked. And it also makes sense because otherwise you would really get lost down there. I mean, seriously. Even in this part that is open for tourists, you can get lost very quickly. They regulated the flow of visitors a little bit by following the light. So you have to imagine if the light goes out when there is a blackout, it is pitch black dark down there. You can't even see your own hand in front of your eyes. It's really insane. And here we have to ask ourselves, how did they illuminate these subterranean cities back then? You can only work with fire in a limited way, especially since we have no soot traces at all in this underground city. And this is something that I ask myself like almost everywhere in the world where we find these subterranean structures, be it in Egypt, the pyramids itself, or even in these subterranean tunnels that we find here in Germany and Austria. But here in the underground cities of Turkey, one of the big questions for me is really, how did they light up these facilities? Again, there are no soot traces. Well, you could say they cleaned it when they prepared it for tourism. But of course, you shouldn't forget the smoke development also. I mean, Derinkuyu is extremely well ventilated and very well planned. No matter where you go, the air feels very fresh. But if I imagine a fire burning here every few meters, that could really change the situation. I think this would be really difficult and probably even dangerous. But there are many more mysteries and questions about these underground cities. You will also see that there are many areas in both the upper and lower floors that haven't been even properly excavated. Yeah, some areas are completely full of sand. And when you enter the first two levels, it becomes clear immediately that this underground facility is much, much larger than the part that you are allowed to move freely today. To my knowledge, nobody really knows how deep Derinkuyu actually is. Especially in the lower levels, when you go there, you never hit a solid end. You never hit rock bottom, let's say. At the end, when you go down and down, you always find sand or metal gates, or it has been closed. But you never really see the end. Like, where does it end? I don't know. Here you see another huge entrance that was closed off. And there are also rumors about a connecting tunnel to the underground city of Kaymakli. And in my opinion, this is no longer a rumor, but can be considered confirmed, because even the Wikipedia article on Derinkuyu states that this is connected to the underground city of Kaymakli via a 9-kilometer long tunnel. That's almost 6 miles. That's absolutely insane. Imagine a tunnel 60 meters or more down there, 9 kilometers long. Honestly, I wouldn't go through there. That is crazy. So this underground city is structured like this. There are always these very narrow connecting tunnels that link the individual rooms or halls with each other. And what I notice, the deeper you go, the narrower and smaller the connecting tunnels become, but the rooms themselves, they get larger the further you go down. And most rooms and tunnels are also equipped with such a round stone door that the inhabitants of the underground city could roll in front of the entrance to lock themselves in and protect themselves from intruders. And here we have to ask also, how exactly did they even do that? I mean, rolling these doors back and forth is also interesting to see how they would have done that. Usually there is a small room on the side where you can climb up, and then from there you can move this rolling stone door. So these steps here in the tunnels and passages, they were added later. Same phenomenon as in Egypt in the pyramids. There are also no stairs, because without these stairs that have been added fairly recently, you would have had to slide down there. And yeah, as you can see, it's always the same. The connecting tunnels are very narrow, and then you enter these huge, gigantic halls. That is very strange, especially from a logistical point of view. Also same as in Egypt, by the way. In Egypt, they also have these huge stone boxes in the pyramids and mastabas, or these subterranean structures. But these boxes themselves, they don't even fit through the tunnels. And that's kind of the same phenomenon here. Like these rolling stone doors, they don't fit through the tunnels at all. I mean, of course, one can argue that the access tunnels, especially in the upper levels, that they were deliberately kept narrow to protect against intruders, so that only one person fits through the tunnel at a time and it's easier to defend yourself. But then, of course, when you get to the really lower levels, where the rooms get increasingly larger, it would also make sense to make the access tunnels a bit larger at least, so you can at least move your stuff there or people can walk through it comfortably. You also have to think they probably had livestock or all sorts of things down there, like goats, and they believe they even had cows down there. And these narrow tunnels, they would make life in these underground cities massively difficult, in my opinion. Here you see one of these niche rooms. Yeah, this is a room from where you can push this rolling door in front of the tunnel. Very cool, sophisticated system. And yeah, it is assumed that up to 20,000 people lived down here in this underground city. Even though I must ask, like, how did they even come to this conclusion? Because what I noticed, there is no wastewater or sewage water management at all. We have these extremely deep ventilation shafts that presumably also served as a water source, because some of them, they hit groundwater at the very bottom. And the word Derinkuyu literally translates to deep well. But what I noticed, there is no sewage water management in this entire underground city. Yeah, I mean, there are some areas that look like they might have carved out some kind of water basins there for something. You could also say maybe they were growing some plants down there with hydroponics or whatever. But people have to go to the toilet somewhere and direct their wastewater somewhere, because they can't simply, to put it bluntly, shit in the same hole where they get their drinking water from, because they would simply poison themselves and then a huge chaos would arise down there. So protecting the clean water source is very important. And especially if you imagine that they also had goats or other animals down there, this is very hard to imagine. On the first floors, this is all still doable and manageable, but without a sewage system, you can imagine how it must have smelled down there and all the problems that arise with it. So that must have been quite intense, and I don't really understand how they solved this. Yeah, in Cappadocia is also known for its landscape with the so-called fairy chimneys. This landscape was created by volcanic eruptions from volcanic ash, basically. And that's how this beautiful fantasy-like landscape was formed. And there were countless, probably thousands of man-made caves created here. Many of the oldest churches in the world are also located here. And here in Cappadocia, you can find hundreds or even thousands of so-called cave churches or rock churches. And this brings us directly to the exciting question, who built Derinkuyu and for what purpose? And there are basically three main explanations, which, however, differ fundamentally. The most well-known explanation is that it was early Christians who built all these underground cities in Anatolia because they were persecuted by the Romans. That was somewhere between the 1st and 4th century AD. And at that time, the Roman Empire was predominantly polytheistic. They believed in various gods, heavily influenced by the Greeks and also the Egyptians. Christians were considered a minority at that time, and as enemies of the state and as infidels. So one explanation is that these early Christians built these underground cities as shelters to hide from Roman soldiers. And in my opinion, this theory has many problems. First, we have to ask, can Derinkuyu really serve as a hiding place? Because once you reach Derinkuyu, you immediately see these ventilation shafts, and you could easily smoke out the enemy through these shafts, let's say. And another reason why it is assumed that it was early Christians who built these underground cities is because Anatolia was a key region for Christianity at that time. Yeah, you could say that it is one of the most important birthplaces of Christianity in the early Christian period. And as I mentioned before, here in Cappadocia, we can find many of these very, very old cave churches or rock churches. And inside these rock churches, we find some of the oldest Christians' wall paintings ever. Yeah, some of the oldest frescoes. And these paintings are very characteristic in their style. Yeah, you can easily identify them as early Christian wall paintings, let's say. But what I noticed about these cave churches, there are often areas where these Christian wall paintings are peeling off, and underneath a completely different picture emerges. Because instead of biblical characters or biblical scenes, we see underneath these wall paintings mainly primitive, simple geometric signs like circles, zigzag, triangles, partially also something that you could identify as pyramids, and also animals, and always painted with red ochre paint. And these signs that we see here are known from very, very old cultures in the world. Yeah, they often stand for the sun or a cosmic order. And in my opinion, these symbols that we see here in these rock churches are probably thousands of years older than Christianity itself. Yeah, you also find symbols like the swastika under these Christian wall paintings. I will go into this topic in detail in one of my next videos. And what I also noticed, many of these above ground man-made caves, or cave churches, how they call it, are often connected to each other with a network of tunnels. And once you are inside there, it looks exactly as the underground city. Sometimes you even find these stone rolling doors. And for me, it is absolutely obvious that many of these above ground cave churches and cave cities in Cappadocia, they look exactly like the underground cities. It's the same architecture from inside. Yeah, it's also not decorated at all, except that in some of them you find these Christian paintings and they have been converted to a church later. But it's the exact same architecture. I hiked through the landscape a bit and I climbed around there and I looked at many of these cave networks and rock churches. And you can definitely see that these above ground cave networks are made in the same style as the underground cities. And in my opinion, many of them were simply just found by these early Christians, and then they moved in there and converted them into places of worship or churches. And many of them, they were already decorated with these symbols made with red ochre paint. And then these early Christians, they found these facilities and maybe they also enlarged them and developed them further and began to decorate them with Christian wall paintings. And that is the reason why academia says these underground cities must have been made by the early Christians as well, because they conclude that these above ground rock churches have been made by these early Christians because they have Christian wall paintings. And I believe that these early Christians only found these facilities and then they decorated them and converted them into churches. As I said, under these characteristic wall frescoes, which are amongst the oldest Christian frescoes in the world, you can find much, much older paintings with primitive symbols with red ochre. Here we have also animal symbols like vultures or other animals. Very strange. but you find that in Egypt too, yeah, especially in predynastic artifacts. For example, in the Naqada culture. The Naqada was predynastic, and they made very, very similar paintings, also with red ochre paint, by the way. You find that a lot in the ancient world. Look at the details, striking similarity. And what also struck me, look at all this symbolism here. To me, this has very little to do with Christianity. It reminds me more of Egypt or even modern Freemasonry. We have a pyramid here, then we have here celestial bodies or planets up there, and we also have this cross here. I think this is called a rosette cross. And this cross here, this is also a pre-Christian symbol. The Christians somehow adopted it later, but this symbol, we see it very often in these cave churches, and also very often under the supposedly oldest Christian wall paintings here in Turkey. Underneath you find this type of cross. And I believe this type of cross, it's like a sun symbol, and it's one of the oldest symbols in human history. In Babylon, the Sumerians used it, the Assyrians, the Hittites, the Persians used it. Many ancient cultures used these kind of crosses and sun crosses. This is not a Christian symbol. The Christians adopted it later, in my opinion. And also look at these two columns. This reminds me of Freemasonry. This doesn't look like a Christian site. And then there is a second model that you often hear in mainstream. They go further back on the timeline, and it is said that the Hittites built Derinkuyu and all these underground cities in Cappadocia. However, there is not much known there. I wasn't able to find many reasons why it should have been the Hittites who built this. They were definitely active in the region, approximately between 1600 and 1200 BC. But I couldn't really find many reasons why the Hittites should have built these underground cities. It is only said that they used it as a strategic infrastructure for war scenarios. Again, a little bit the idea that they hide from the enemy or tricked the enemy, but I couldn't find much more explanation on that. And then there is the third model. Many Iranian or Persian scholars believe that the answer to the question of who built these underground cities worldwide lies in ancient Persian or Zoroastrian writings. The Avesta is the sacred collection of text of Zoroastrianism, the ancient Persian religion. This makes it one of the oldest known religious books ever. Zoroastrianism is older than Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Similar to the Old Testament, there are many elements in the Avesta that are found to be historically or scientifically proven. Many Iranian scholars rely heavily on these old scriptures because they believe that much has turned out to be true. There is a section in the Avesta in which the god Ahura Mazda warns the prophet Yima that a massive climate catastrophe is coming. They speak of a bitter winter that will bring life-threatening conditions to the surface. Yima is then given the task of building a so-called Vara, and a Vara is nothing other than a subterranean city that provides shelter for humans, animals, plants, and seeds. Practically like a subterranean ark. Exactly what Derinkuyu could be. This mythological underground city, which is described in the Avesta, was meant to be inhabitable for a long time and provide protection from a global cataclysm. And if we take these old Zoroastrian writings literally and take their worldview serious, then This Vara predates known human history and the end of the last Younger Dryas. So the Persians believed that their ancestors built these underground cities presumably long before the last Younger Dryas, and this would push Derinkuyu back on the timeline to at least 10,000 BC, probably even further back. And regarding the Persian model, it must also be said that there are also subterranean cities in Iran. For example, we have here the underground city of Nushabad. This is the most well-known in Iran, but there are more. Nushabad looks very similar to Derinkuyu. In fact, if you would show me these photos without telling me that this is Iran, I would say that's Derinkuyu. There is also another huge underground city in Midyat here in Turkey, near the city of Mardin. It's also a little bit far from here, but again, same architecture. So yeah, these are the three most common explanations about who might have built Derinkuyu and all these other underground cities. They also found some artifacts here and there in these underground cities, some tools and metals and so on. And some of these findings could be dated also. But as always, such findings only date the last user, but not the builder of such facilities. So I think we can take it as proven that the Christians and probably also the Hittites have at least used these facilities, I think. And what I also find very interesting, the church seems to have been involved worldwide in somehow keeping its hand over these kind of underground facilities. Let me explain. Here in Derinkuyu, and also in all other underground cities in Turkey, you always find a church almost directly on top, usually right next to today's entrance. And Derinkuyu is no exception. There is even a very, very large church on top. It's a Greek Orthodox church, and in Turkey it was like this. In the 1920s, there was this so-called Great Population Exchange between Turkey and Greece. They sent the Greek Christians back to Greece from Turkey, and Greece sent the Turkish Muslims to Turkey. And during this time, almost all Christians were expelled from Turkey. And until that point, Derinkuyu was mostly a Christian community, or at least 50-50. And on top of Derinkuyu stands this very large church, and I strongly assume that they probably controlled the knowledge about these underground facilities, same as they do almost everywhere in the world, for many, many years. I guess they were sitting on the entrance until they were expelled. And in the end of this video, we will also take a closer look at this church. And this also coincides with what we find here in Germany and Austria. Many of you probably have never heard about this topic, but in Austria and in South Germany, we have a phenomenon that we also find hundreds or maybe thousands of kilometers of very, very old subterranean tunnel systems. And here I would really like to mention the research of Professor Heinrich Kusch, who investigated and partially dated hundreds of underground facilities in Germany and Austria. I have recently also published one of his lectures here on my channel. I have translated it to English. This is super interesting stuff. I highly recommend to watch this, guys. I will link it here. This is also a big mystery with these subterranean tunnel systems that we find in Germany and Austria. And here in Austria and Germany, we have also subterranean facilities that look very similar to these underground cities in Turkey. In most cases, we find also chapels, churches, sometimes even cathedrals or palaces of elite families on it. Even the Cologne Cathedral in Germany stands on a way older subterranean structure. Most people have never heard about that, but I also believe, just like Professor Kusch, that there is a system behind it. Yeah, the church has really systematically covered up these underground facilities worldwide, and the Vatican has probably, until this day, information in their archives that we can only dream of. Professor Kusch has dug up some very interesting old documents from church archives from Austria. And these documents speak of the fact that in the 16th century, the church started to close these kind of subterranean facilities. Or to put it bluntly, they filled them up. Yeah, we have written documentation that in Austria, they have even redirected entire rivers to flush sediments into these underground facilities to completely fill them up. This happened in the 16th century. And some of these documents, they also talk about the presence of humanoid races that live down there in these hollow earth or subterranean facilities. In my opinion, these subterranean facilities in Austria are the most underrated topic in the realm of ancient megalithic mysteries. It's really crazy. Some of them have been dated to be older than 60,000 years with TCN dating. And he also found written information that the church was interacting with these beings or these people who live down there in these subterranean cities. They even talk about that they were trading with them and doing business with them. But then suddenly, at one point in the 16th century, they radically stopped all interaction with these subterranean tribes, let's say, and they broke off contact completely with them. And then they ordered worldwide to fill up these facilities and to close them forever, let's say. We even have written communication to the ruling nobility families at that time, where the church is asking them to build their facilities, like their castles and estates, on top of these underground sites and on top of the accesses. And in my opinion, this has been going on for a long, long time, probably for thousands of years. And I think that is also the reason why we see under almost all the historic monuments, wherever you go in the world, you always find way older subterranean tunnels or structures below them. No matter if it's the pyramids in Egypt or medieval cathedrals or temples in South America, there is always something underneath. And here in Turkey, there is another very good example. There is another underground city here nearby, the underground city of Nevşehir. And I believe it was only discovered in 2015 or 2017. And this underground city is also located under a very old castle. And this castle is kind of like the landmark of this city of Nevşehir. And it seems like people had no idea that this gigantic subterranean city was basically laying under their feet, under this castle, for hundreds or many, many years. And again, everywhere in the world where we find these underground facilities, you're never allowed to reach the point where you find a hard end. Either it was somehow walled up, or you find a steel gate, or it was just filled or not excavated. But I never see the hard end. Same as in Egypt or in Austria or in Turkey, anywhere where I visited ancient subterranean facilities, I never see the end. Very strange. So all the Christians were expelled after this population exchange, and this church that's standing on top of Derinkuyu is also empty today. Unfortunately, there is still a problem with vandalism here to this day. And from 1928, all Christians left Derinkuyu. And then it somehow happened that this underground city was forgotten. It was then so-called rediscovered in 1963 by a man called Ömer Demir. He was carrying out some construction work in his basement and he accidentally broke through a wall, and suddenly he found himself standing in this giant long tunnel. And after that, the Turkish government became involved and aware of the facility. It was probably then prepared for tourism, and Derinkuyu was then opened for tourists in 1969. And I have to say, I find this story somehow a bit strange, because I talked a lot with locals in Derinkuyu, and many of them told me that the older generation, that they still used to play down there as children. I even heard some stories that there were sightings of small humanoid beings down there from time to time. And there are also many people who have been using parts of the underground city for many generations until today. And therefore, I find it a bit hard to believe that Derinkuyu was really completely forgotten and only rediscovered in 1963. To me, it seems more like a narrative was being built here. Ömer Demir, who allegedly rediscovered the underground city, he also turned out to be one of the most active researchers dealing with the topic of these underground cities in Cappadocia. Maybe Ömer Demir just convinced the Turkish government to become active here so that the underground city can be opened and investigated so that it will have lights inside. And I guess Derinkuyu was not really rediscovered. I think it was rather ignored for the longest time by the Turkish government until someone in 1963 pressed them to become active. But I don't believe it was really forgotten by the locals. And yeah, this story of course raises many questions, especially because there is no decoration in there, at least in the part that is accessible today. There is nothing written on the walls. Everything is naked. There are no messages down there. It almost seems as if all traces have been removed at some point in time, if there were ever any traces. But in any case, a lot was closed up, as you can see. And what we see today is just a tiny part. It is always portrayed as if there were only 8 floors in Derinkuyu, but I have a feeling it goes way deeper. And there are many rooms and tunnels that we found there that are completely dark. If I wouldn't have my flashlight with me, I would not been able to explore many areas of this underground city because it's really pitch black down there. And it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. What also really surprised me is the air circulation down there. The ventilation seems to work very, very well. You never feel like it's hard to breathe or it's getting hot down there. On the contrary, it's actually very cool there. And sometimes you can even feel like a wind or a breeze blowing down there. And as I said before, the further you go down, the narrower the tunnels become and the bigger the rooms become. And I find this very strange, especially if you imagine that they had to carve out these very narrow tunnels. It will make your work so much more difficult because you cannot really stand in there. You cannot move your arms very well to hammer properly. I don't really understand what's the logic behind this. And also in these very narrow tunnels, only one person can work at a time. So imagine how many years it took them to build this. This is crazy. Yeah, two people cannot fit next to each other in these tunnels. Here we have again a very, very narrow tunnel. Crazy, really. And sometimes, you know, in these narrow, dark tunnels, you feel really cramped and yeah, it's really a strange feeling down there. There you can see another metal gate and another shaft that goes down there. Incredible, really. I find it very hard to understand what exactly has happened down here. I mean, this room and tunnel which we just saw, what could have been the purpose of that? And why does it even need such a long tunnel to reach this room? The architecture of Derinkuyu makes no sense at all from the perspective of someone who just wants to hide and chill down there. You don't need so many levels for that, and you certainly don't need such long connecting tunnels for that. I really don't get this. This is also interesting here. This room here is laid out like a cross. Yeah, it looks like a cross, and nothing else is there, no decoration. And because of this room is laid out like a cross, archaeologists assume this must have been a church. Yeah? The Christians made this room because it has a cross shape. And yeah, these are the lines of reasoning that are sometimes very hard to follow, in my opinion. I mean, seriously, in this huge underground city, you find one room that has a shape like a cross, and then you take it immediately as proof that Christians have built this place. How are we supposed to imagine that? The Christians, they carve out this cross-shaped huge hall here, but then they got too tired to even chisel a nice cross into the wall. I mean, there at the back where you have this lamp, you could have put a nice cross there or something. I don't know. Yeah, then we have more shafts and tunnels going down to all directions, and most of it, of course, is not accessible. You see, these rooms are very large, and then there are these mini small tunnels branching off. What could be an explanation for that? I mean, you can't also say, okay, it's productive. They only made the tunnels so small because they wanted to save work or something. Yeah, but then why did they make them so long? And why are the rooms so large? And then I would like to remind you again, how did they light this underground city? Quite apart from the fact that we have no soot traces, in such a tunnel, we would have also no room to put torches or anything at all. Here we're looking up now into one of these ventilation shafts. That is probably one of the shafts that you saw me looking through earlier. And at that point, we are already very, very deep inside this underground city. And it goes much further, guys. And here you can see, if someone comes towards you in these long tunnels, then one person has to go back. You can't pass each other inside these tunnels. They're just too narrow. And now imagine that with 20,000 people. You will always have somebody coming towards you, and you have to line up just to go from room to room. And no toilet. And then, of course, there is the idea, what if they built these underground cities from below? That is a crazy idea. I mean, that assumes, of course, that there is somehow a hollow earth civilization, or that someone lives down there, and then they practically dug it up from below. Okay, now let's look into another ventilation shaft. This is another shaft going down. The ventilation shafts in Derinkuyu, they don't always go straight from top to bottom. It's really like a termite mound. This one here, for example, it goes only down from this level where we are right now. This is really crazy engineering. And it is so deep that you don't see the end. Creepy. Absolutely creepy. Yeah, this is also funny. It's just a round walk. You can go in one side and come out of the other side. Why would somebody carve something like this? I believe Professor Kusch has also documented something similar in one of the underground facilities in Austria. No idea what's that for. Only this small passage here that it seems like it doesn't even have a real purpose. Imagine the amount of working hours that are needed to chisel this out of the rock. And only one person can work there. By the way, some of the locals, they told me that there is not only a tunnel from Derinkuyu to Kaymakli, but also to Soganli, to the cave city of Soganli. That would be a 21-kilometer tunnel. That is 13 miles. Honestly, I cannot even imagine a 20-kilometer tunnel being this narrow. That is way too crazy. And who on earth would have the balls to go through this tunnel? Insane, really. And I also know from the locals that the connecting tunnel between Derinkuyu and Kaymakli is not really accessible. And apparently it's even narrower than the tunnels we see here. Also, they told me that it's partially collapsed, probably intentionally. And if these connecting tunnels to Kaymakli and Soganli really exist, then we really have to assume that all of these underground cities are connected. Or maybe it is just one giant underground city. And we have visited all of these underground cities here in Cappadocia that are open for visitors. We've been to Kaymakli, Masi, Özkonak, Derinkuyu and Nevşehir here. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the other underground cities. Here you can see there are always arrows on the walls so you can find your way back to the surface. We also got a bit lost in there sometimes. And before leaving, I found one area that was closed off and a steel gate somehow was broken or it wasn't fixed properly. So I was able to sneak in there. And what I saw down there for me was the most intense part of the whole underground city. You will see that in a moment. Here is another ventilation shaft. This one also goes down very, very deep. So deep that you are not even able to see the end of it. And as you know, we are already in one of the lower levels of the underground city. And many people believe that these subterranean cities are much, much deeper than they want us to believe. Many even believe that these underground cities are accesses to the underworld or to the hollow earth, so to speak. There are many stories about the underworld from many parts of the world. For example, in Tibet or Central Asia, there are legends about Shambhala or Agartha, which is a kind of underground cave city. Or in India, there is Patala, the realm of the Nagas, which is also an underworld inhabited by snake or reptilian beings. Down there, there are entire cities, palaces, technologies, and lakes and water and so on. And also here where I live in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, Cambodia and Laos, there are legends about underground realms in which the Nagas are living. And these reptilian or snake beings who practically steer humanity from the underworld. They are located under rivers or under mountains and temple complexes. They are a bit like the guardians of the physical world or the keepers of the occult or mediators between the upper and the lower world. And then we have the Hades in Greece, which is also an underground physical place that can be reached via access points from caves or mountains. In Mesoamerica, with the Mayans, there is the Xibalba, which is also an underground cave world. And also in the Alps and in the German-speaking countries, there are many folklore stories about inner cavities in the mountains in which time runs differently. Professor Kusch also talks a lot about these things in this 3-hour lecture that I have here on my channel, so check out the video. And I find this very interesting that we have these kind of stories from ancient cultures all around the world about these subterranean cave cities or these hollow earth stories. I mean, such stories must come from somewhere, I guess, and that seems to have been a thing worldwide with early civilizations. And anyone who follows our channel knows in Egypt too, there are far older subterranean tunnel networks under almost all of the pyramids and temples. Or in Central America, we also have the phenomenon that many times we find churches standing directly on top of ancient pyramids and temple structures. From a certain point in time, the Vatican systematically ensured worldwide to cover up these kind of subterranean pagan facilities. In my home country in Germany, we also have many examples. In Nuremberg, there is also a huge subterranean city under the old town of Nuremberg. There is a tourist tour that you can book. I did that also. A video is coming soon. But they don't really like people filming down there, and they don't like people asking critical questions in Nuremberg. That I can tell you already. Or another example we have in Heidelberg. In Heidelberg we have the Heiligenberg, which translates to Holy Mountain. And at the very top there is the so-called Heidenloch, the heathen hole or the pagan hole. I was there too. Video is also coming soon. And I can tell you this so-called pagan hole is not what they're telling us, folks. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to see these videos. Another very interesting point, by the way, the entire Cappadocia region is considered an absolute UFO hotspot in Turkey for sightings and strange phenomena. I'm actually not really into this whole UFO topic, but this is true. In Cappadocia, there are very frequent sightings of strange lights flying around at night. And especially around this characteristic landscape which Cappadocia is so well known for, these beautiful stone towers created by volcanic eruption. And these stone towers, they have earned the name fairy chimneys because many people believe that these structures were built at night by fairies a long time ago. Because sometimes you still see these strange lights or orbs racing around these rock formations at night, and these are explained as fairies, and that's why they call these rock formations fairy chimneys. I find this a very interesting detail. I mean, Turkey is a large country, but for some reason this kind of phenomena seems to happen a lot here in Cappadocia. So let's continue. Here again we have some tunnels that have been sealed off. Here also one shaft, and this is a very typical example. It goes down, but it was filled up. And here you really have to ask, how is it even possible that everything is filled up? I mean, even in the lower levels. How are we supposed to imagine that? How do these sediments and this sand even got to the lower levels? How does that work? For me, there are only two explanations. The first one is that it has been done by humans intentionally, which would have been a huge effort only. I mean, imagine you're presented with the task to fill up this underground city. Or the second explanation that comes to my mind is that these facilities were really built, same as the Persians assume, before the Great Flood or before a huge cataclysm. Maybe there was really a gigantic, unimaginable biblical flood that at some point completely flooded, or at least partially flooded, this underground city. And maybe even the Persians, who placed the origin at 10,000 years or older, only found these facilities and then started to clear them. Maybe this is really from a time where we have zero idea what happened there. Maybe it was all flooded and then at some point in time over thousands of years it has been excavated. Who knows? And this leads us also to another interesting question. Where is all the debris from this underground city anyway? I mean, we're talking about millions and millions of tons of crushed or powderized rock. I mean, there should be some mountains created in the region, but somehow that's not the case. And if these underground cities were really built before a biblical flood or before a great cataclysm, then this would explain why we don't see any mountains of debris. This is also very interesting. What could be the reason for this basin or this pool here in the middle? What is that? And it's also strange that they have added masonry here in this deep level here of the underground city. Very strange what we see here. Yeah, then another chamber here. Yeah, this is also highly interesting here. We are now in one of the lower levels of Derinkuyu, and this room here is actually not intended for tourists to enter because it is completely dark and very few, they bring their own flashlight. And here you find a room with a corridor that continues back there. However, this corridor has been closed off with one of these rolling stone doors. And what's really interesting, I tried to look behind the stone door, and the passage behind it is completely filled up with sand or with sediment. And I asked myself, how does that even work? How is that possible? That material must have been introduced from behind. Questions upon questions. It's really like in Egypt. The more you get into it, and especially the deeper you go, the more questions you end up with. Way too crazy, all of this. Don't forget to subscribe, guys. The videos about the other underground cities are coming soon. And also, I will make a separate video where I explain why these above-ground man-made caves and chambers were not created by early Christians either, and why they must be older. By the way, at this point also many thanks to all our viewers. I am always overwhelmed by how many good, constructive comments and ideas you guys have. It's really a lot of fun with this community. A huge thank you to all of you. And I can promise you guys, I still have a lot of material for you. I don't even know where to continue. I have countless of hours of material from Egypt, Indonesia, Turkey, Thailand, Cambodia. So stay tuned, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Here we have a tunnel which is blocked with some bigger stones, which I haven't seen yet. And here I also saw something interesting. We found some cave mushrooms. Somehow some black stuff is leaking out of the stone and lots of mushrooms are growing here. That looked really cool. Maybe these are glowing mushrooms. Is there even such a thing as glowing mushrooms? I have to check on that. And one more thing to the sewage system, guys. Earlier we spoke about that it seems like they had no toilets or any wastewater management here in Derinkuyu. And if you ask mainstream archaeology, okay, but if 20,000 people live down there, how did they go to the toilet? And the explanation is very interesting, that there were people down there whose job was to collect wastewater and garbage and feces in containers and then dispose it on the surface. But here also we must not forget, officially these were early Christians hiding from the evil Romans, and that would mean that they always had to sneak up somehow when the coast was clear with this giant container full of shit and then somehow dispose it on the surface when no one's looking and then quickly sneak down again into the underground city. And every single time they do that, they have to be really careful that nobody sees them because it will blow their cover and then the life of 20,000 people would be at risk. In my opinion, we have here an unsolvable logistical problem here. The only possibility that I see to make this theory work is that maybe we find the solution or the explanation in the areas further down that we are not allowed to enter. I mean, maybe they have a sewage system down there, who knows? Here we have another corridor that was closed off. Down there, there are actually more corridors that are closed off than open. Yeah, and now we come to the craziest part. This was again a coincidence. We were actually about to leave Derinkuyu already when I noticed an area that wasn't lit, and I entered this room, and there I saw a gate that somehow wasn't fixed. It seems like it fell down or they were repairing it. And there was a very, very small, narrow tunnel. Actually, one of the narrowest tunnels I've seen in Derinkuyu. I went in. However, right from the start, I had a very strange feeling about this. My wife didn't even want me to go down there. The tunnel was very, very long and also very steep. In the video, you don't really notice the incline, but it was really steep. And I really had to crouch down there because it was so small, and it was complete darkness down there. Complete darkness. And let me tell you, it's a darkness that we humans are not used to at all. Yeah, when are we exposed to such a darkness? There is zero light down there. And it's really terrifying, actually. So yeah, I went down this tunnel with my flashlight. And what I saw there, I could almost not believe my eyes. This tunnel leads to this huge hall that isn't even properly excavated or cleared. And there is this staircase that leads up to this kind of portal. And back there, you can also see that it was also walled up. Yeah, they sealed it up there. And then on the other side, you see more tunnels probably going down. There are at least 3 or 4 tunnels on the opposite side of where I'm standing now. And on my side, from where I'm looking out of the tunnel, I guess there are also more tunnels. And I really thought, should I go there now and investigate more? But I came to the conclusion that I should better not do it. Why? Because I only had one flashlight with me, and imagine if this flashlight would have failed. I would have walked around there. The floor is not even leveled. Everything is not really excavated. And now imagine I am in the middle of this hall in complete darkness. My lamp goes out, and then I have to find my way back. And imagine I walk accidentally into the wrong tunnel. Wow, I still get goosebumps today when I think about this. And I actually had a really strong feeling inside of me telling me, hey, go back up immediately. This is not good. You're not supposed to be here. So I really didn't dare to go any further. It's really crazy. Look at this, folks. Huge room, simply carved out. And you can be sure that it goes way more down there. Now I ask you guys, what is this place? How can it be that these facilities are so intensely filled with sand? How is this possible? Yeah, and then let's go back and look at how narrow this tunnel is. To me, this makes really no sense. I really have a feeling that we are missing a crucial part here to understand these underground cities. And we must also not forget, according to official sources, only 15% of Derinkuyu is accessible. What else must be waiting for us down there? And unfortunately, there is also not much information about the excavation that apparently is said to have taken place between 1963 and 69. And that is also a bit strange. If this was really rediscovered, then there should be excavation documentation, but there is almost no information about this. I assume it was already excavated and they only prepared it for tourism somehow. There was probably a little bit chaos down there, rubble and all kinds of stuff that people left behind over centuries. But if anyone has any more information about what exactly happened since the so-called rediscovery of Derinkuyu, I would be very interested in that. As I mentioned before, this 9-kilometer or 6-mile tunnel to Kaymakli seems to be confirmed because it is written on the Wikipedia page. And if these tunnels are really as narrow as the one that we just saw, or even narrower, then we really have to ask ourselves, what are these tunnels even made for? Either they had some kind of vehicle down there where you can sit or lie on, or it was really built by people or beings who were significantly smaller than we are and who could walk comfortably through these narrow tunnels. But no one can convince me that some humans built a 9-kilometer connecting tunnel between these underground cities that is so narrow that only a 5-year-old can walk through this. And don't forget, these tunnels are one-way tunnels. Imagine you walk the 9-kilometer tunnel and then halfway you meet someone. You cannot pass each other in these tunnels. And imagine you have to crouch like this for 9 or 20 kilometers. Good luck to your spine, really. Yeah, now it's time to go back to the surface. And when you come out from Derinkuyu, you will get really intensely blinded by the sun. I've never had this effect in my life before. I mean, you know the feeling when you come out of a dark bedroom and suddenly you look into the sun and it hurts your eyes. But this is a whole nother story here. Here you can see again one of these ventilation shafts. And next we will look at this church that I mentioned before. This Greek Orthodox church that you see in the background, it is actually a very large church by local standards. And I find this again a very interesting coincidence that exactly on top of the largest underground city in the region stands also the largest church in the region. What a coincidence. When I was there, the church was unfortunately closed because it was being renovated, but I assume that at least until 1928, the church somehow controlled the access to Derinkuyu. So I walked around the church and had a closer look at it, and right on the courtyard I found one of these stone rolling doors that we also saw down there in the underground city. And when I visited the underground city of Kaymakli, I also found a church directly on top. However, this church was a bit smaller and it was much more of a ruin. So I went in there, and inside this church there was actually exactly in the middle of the building a hole, which suggests that there might have been an access point there once too. And this really leads me to the conclusion, same as Professor Kusch was already able to prove in Austria and Germany, that the church systematically placed its buildings, chapels and cathedrals directly on top of the entrance of these subterranean facilities. And then during the 16th century, probably during the Council of Trent, the decision was made that these facilities will be covered up worldwide and sealed. The Council of Trent in Italy, it lasted for several years. I believe it ended around the year 1563. And interestingly, exactly during that time period, in the German-speaking countries, there were also documented reports of strange phenomena in the sky or some kind of battles in the sky. There is the famous celestial battle of Nuremberg and also from Basel in Switzerland. And in both of these cities, there are also very large underground cities. I will definitely make another video about the underground city of Nuremberg, because here we basically can ask the same questions as in Derinkuyu. Yeah guys, then we have reached the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it once again. Let me know in the comments what you think about these underground cities. Do you think they have been built by these early Christians, Or do you agree more with the Persian explanation? Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and if you like to support our work, you can find the PayPal link in the description. Thank you for watching, have a wonderful day, and see you in the next video. Ciao!
So, I just climbed up here, super high, and look at that view. I'm inside a cave, very high up, very high up. Cappadocia is amazing.